When you go on vacation, you're probably going to fly on a plane. Some people are scared about flying. They are worried that a state-of-the-art technological achievement will suddenly fail and plummet to the ground. However, you shouldn't be worried, as statistically, planes are safer than cars. This is the story of the crash that jump-started these huge advancements in aviation safety and caused the planes you fly on to be safer than the cars you drive in. The Grand Canyon mid-air collision was a plane crash in 1956 which became a turning point in aviation. As a result of this tragedy, over 100 people died, ATC was improved, and the FAA was created. Today, new technology is still being developed in order to improve aviation safety. All stories begin somewhere. 9:01 a.m. on June 30th, 1956, TWA Transworld Airlines Flight 2 took off from Los Angeles Airport. It was going to Kansas City, Missouri. Aboard was 41-year-old ex-Navy personnel Captain Jack Scandy, 31-year-old co-pilot James Rittman, 37-year-old flight engineer Forrest Brayfogle, and 35-year-old flight engineer Harry Allen. The captain had 14,922 flight hours and 7,208 hours on the Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, the plane they were flying. The co-pilot had 6,976 flight hours and 825 hours in the L-1049. There were a total of 70 people on board. Also at 9:04 a.m., United Airlines Flight 718 took off from the same airport. It was headed to Chicago, Illinois. In the cockpit, there was 48-year-old Captain Robert Shirley, 36-year-old co-pilot Robert Harms, and 39-year-old flight engineer Gerardo Flor. The captain had 16,492 total flight hours and 1,238 hours in the Douglas DC-7, the plane they were flying. The co-pilot had 4,540 total flight hours and 230 hours in the DC-7. There were a total of 58 people on board. The TWA plane was a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation. This plane was specifically requested to be made for TWA to use. The first time it flew was as a prototype in 1943 for the military. This version then was turned into the C-69 Constellation. It was then upgraded in 1950, and that version first flew in 1951 as the L-1049 Super Constellation. In conclusion, this plane was fairly new, only about 5 years old. This is important to consider, as the plane contained some of the newest aviation technology at the time. The United Airlines plane was a Douglas DC-7. This plane was originally requested to be made by Douglas for American Airlines. They wanted a plane that could travel coast to coast without stopping for 8 hours. This plane began production in 1953, but stopped shortly after in 1958. This also makes it a fairly new aircraft at the time. At the time, not many people were heavily concerned about airplane safety. Therefore, not many movements were made to improve it. This would end up being one of the leading factors to the crash. As all other plane accidents, a series of events has to occur before a plane crashes. For starters, a storm was brewing. At 9:21, TWA-2 requested a change in altitude from 19,000 to 21,000 feet to avoid turbulence.
TWA dispatch, TWA-2. We've got a little bit of weather here we want to get on top of. Be a good man and ask Salt Lake to clear us to 21,000.
Unable to approve to 1,000 due to traffic.
That's a no-go on 21,000.
It was cleared by ATC to be 1,000 feet on top, which means 1,000 feet over bad weather conditions.
Roger that. Advise Salt Lake I'm going to VFR and 1,000 on top.
Maintain at least 1,000 on top. Advise TWA-2 his traffic is United 718.
This approval to be 1,000 feet on top was essentially a loophole for TWA-2 to be at 21,000 feet, the same altitude as the United 718 plane. At 9:55, the TWA plane stated it would reach the Painted Desert line of position at 10:31.
Estimate Painted Desert at 10:31.
At 9:58, the United plane stated it was at 21,000 feet and would reach the Painted Desert line of position at 10:31. ATC had assumed that they would both continue moving on their planned routes. At 10:31, a radio signal was received but wasn't able to be understood at the moment. Later on, during the investigation, It was interpreted as Salt Lake, United 17, were going in from co-pilot Robert Arms on United 718. There was no communication after that. The planes had hit each other and were unable to recover from the crash, killing all 128 people on board both planes once they hit the ground. Both planes were not on their planned routes at the time of the crash.
What's he doing there? Pull up!
ATC was still unaware of the fatal crash. Neither plane had reported passing the painted desert line of position. ATC tried to desperately contact both planes but failed. They reported a missing aircraft alert. Later on in the day, another pilot that was flying over the Grand Canyon reported seeing smoke. It was used to identify the location of the two planes' wreckage. The reason of the crash was due to multiple things. First of all, it was the pilot's responsibility to be on the lookout for nearby aircrafts. After further investigation, investigators did conclude that this was likely difficult due to limited vision because of clouds and cockpit duties. Even with these circumstances, the pilots should still have been able to see each other, therefore making the crash their fault. However, another major part of it was the weak ATC. At the time, air traffic controllers were unable to know much information about the plane, therefore making them unable to warn the pilots. The reason for the pilots being off their planned routes is assumed to be because they wanted to give their passengers a nice view of the Grand Canyon. According to a newspaper titled The Nome Nugget, a senior crash officer called it a 1 in a million, 1 in a billion crash. This crash brought a lot of attention to aviation safety. Was flying commercially actually safe? Action had to be taken. In 1957, Congress passed the Airways Modernization Act. In 1958, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aviation Act of 1958, founding the FAA. This helped solve multiple problems that affected aviation safety. It solved the multiple safety concerns, such as restricting certain areas during certain events and improving upon current air traffic laws. After this, every single crash was investigated by the FAA, and every single crash investigation led to at least one change in aviation safety. Air traffic controllers became more coordinated, and more restrictions and laws were placed. In today's world, flying commercially is safer than ever before. As a matter of fact, there hasn't been a crash of a major US airline since 2009. Of course, that's just the United States. However, there were only 2 fatal airline crashes in 2023, which is the lowest of any other year. In summary, 2 planes, TWA-2, a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, and United 718, a Douglas DC-7, hit each other over the Grand Canyon in Arizona on June 30th, 1956, killing all 128 people on board both planes. This crash was mainly due to pilot error. However, this crash also shed light on the bad system. In 1957, the Airways Modernization Act was passed, and in 1958, the Federal Aviation Act was passed, founding the FAA and improving aviation regulations. This improved aviation in the long term, with airplane accidents being extremely rare in today's world.